Chapter 71. 1. Small mistake. With the carapace demon using his deadly scythe to support the weight of his body, Sunny was temporarily safe from its sharp blade. Of course, the monster had other means of attack. Each one of his towering legs was like a siege ram, dangerous and capable of devastating destruction. But at the moment, his position was too precarious to lash out with them. Sunny had at least a second to do whatever he wished to, with no risk involved. The only thing he had to avoid was going directly under the behemoth, thus putting himself in danger of being crushed to death by the demon's giant body. Coincidentally, that was exactly what he had to do. Crap, crap, crap. Glancing up at the massive armored creature, Sunny cursed and dashed forward. A moment later, he dove underneath the carapace demon, feeling the thick shadows swallow him whole. Instantly, Sunny was covered in cold sweat. There was nothing but polished metal and murderous intent above him now. All the monster had to do to turn the tiny human into a puddle of blood was to rest his body on the sand. Under the crushing weight, Sunny's organs would burst and his bones would turn to dust. There wouldn't be anything solid left of him at all, only a thin layer of bloody goo smeared across the ground. Not the best situation to find yourself in. With his nerves on the verge of melting, Sunny brandished his sword and rushed forward. His eyes were glued to the joints of carapace demon's legs. He was utterly focused, looking for the slightest movement, waiting for it. With no room for error, Sunny pushed every unnecessary thought and emotion into the farthest corner of his mind, not allowing dread, doubt and his tendency to overthink things to slow him down even by a fraction of a second. Time moved excruciatingly slowly. It felt as though hours had passed, but in reality, it was only a couple of moments. Sunny was only at the second pair of the giant monster's legs. It was then that he finally noticed the almost imperceptible change in the demon's posture. The tension in his joint changed slightly, indicating that the behemoth was about to move. This was the sign that Sunny was both hoping for and terrified of. Now, his survival was wholly dependent on whether or not he was fast enough. As soon as his eyes had registered the change in the creature's posture, Sunny pivoted on one leg and dashed to the side, trying to get away from underneath the armored giant. A small cloud of sand was sent flying by his sudden turn. But the demon was incredibly fast. He threw his body down, determined to squash the odious invader like a bug. With inertia, and the limits of his human body slowing Sunny down, he felt the metal surface of the carapace begin to fall down on his head long before reaching the safe zone. Death was approaching with abhorrent speed. One step too. Was he going to make it in time? The carapace demon fell to the ground with a thunderous crash, sending large clouds of sand into the air. The impact was so strong that the whole island trembled. The furious mass of falling metal and spikes missed Sunny by just a few centimeters. He flew from underneath the demon's body at the last possible moment by performing a desperate dive. Crushing into the sand, Sunny rolled away and jumped back to his feet, slightly disoriented by the shock wave of the giant's fall. How I actually managed to survive. Sometimes, life was full of surprises. But all jokes aside, he was not really astonished. His actions, while potentially fatal, had been deliberate and calculated. He was not in the habit of putting his life at risk without being sure that there would be at least a moderate chance of making it out alive. His actions were also always purposeful and pursued a specific goal. In this case, it was to bring the carapace demon down. Only by forcing the giant creature down to the ground, in reach of their blades, could they hope to kill it. In that sense, this dangerous gamble ended in resounding success. The bastard was now lying on his abdomen, his carapace and humanoid torso, where all the vital organs were situated, well in the changing star's attack range. Now Sunny just had to create an opening for her to deal the fatal blow, although he still had no idea about how she was planning to bypass the impenetrable barrier of the demon's armor. However, creating that opening was not going to be a trivial task. Despite the fact that the monster's mobility was now severely reduced, the distance between him and the two sleepers was also much smaller, which made dodging his attacks that much harder. Sunny was about to experience that hardship for himself. He was barely back on his feet when the terrifying scythe flashed through the air, threatening to slice his body in half. Sunny had no idea how Nephi's was doing on the other side of the creature's enormous body against the pincer, but dealing with the scythe was almost beyond his abilities. The burning eye of the demon that followed his every move was not helping the situation at all. With very little time to react, Sunny did the only thing he could think of. He jumped as high as he could and pulled his legs up to his chest, performing a very awkward forward somersault. Because of the number of shadow fragments he had consumed, and the physical enhancement brought by the shadow, the height of his jump was nothing short of impressive, by human standards. The scythe's blade whistled beneath Sunny, so close that he could feel the wind brushing against his face. Landing on the ground, he dashed forward. Sunny knew that the scythe would come back, but he had a second or two to change his position, getting in front of the behemoth. He had to make the giant creature forget about Nephi's completely and concentrate fully on dealing with him, and him alone. To do that, he had to get in range of both the scythe and the pincer. What a lovely task. Feeling that his time was running out, Sunny spun around and raised the azure blade. Just as he thought, the carapace demon was already bringing the scythe down at him again, this time in a ruthless horizontal thrust. The sharp tip of the scythe was flying through the air, aimed at his chest. However, he had slightly underestimated the demon's reaction time. As the result, there was already no time to dodge. One small mistake was the difference between life and death on the forgotten shore. The scene of their first fight against a carapace centurion flashed in Sunny's mind. The situation was eerily similar to this one, with the inescapable doom approaching him at the speed of lightning, too swift and close to be avoided, brought by the blade of a carapace creature's scythe. But Sunny wasn't the same as he was before. Since that fateful battle, he had spent every day training, gaining experience, and gathering power. He had fought his way through this hell, paying a price of blood for every step. He wasn't that easy to kill anymore. Instead of soft flesh, the scythe was met by the hard steel of the azure blade. Not only did Sunny block the blow, he even managed to angle the sword in a way that would deflect most of the impact instead of absorbing the full force of it. One of his hands was placed on the hilt, the other gripped the tip of the blade with enough strength to prevent the edge from cutting his fingers off. The residual force was still enough to send him flying back, but it was not enough to break the bones in his hands, not with the shadow enhancing the resilience of his body. The azure blade, however, was not as lucky. With a sorrowful ring, the blade shattered, breaking off near the crossguard. Beautiful shards of blue steel fell to the ground. Sunny gritted his teeth, knowing what would happen next. The spell spoke, announcing the destruction of his trusty sword. Your memory has been... He didn't get to hear the rest of the sentence, because, in the next moment, his body collided with the ground. Sunny bounced a couple of times, feeling flashes of pain radiating through his bones, rolled, and finally came to a stop. He was comparatively fine. Standing up, Sunny stumbled and barely managed to remain on his feet. He glanced around and noticed that the trunk of the great tree was not that far away. 24 meters away, the carapace demon was slowly turning his head, planning to concentrate his murderous rage on Nephi's. This was the exact opposite of what Sunny had to achieve. He had to attract the monster's attention somehow. But what could he do? As the remains of the azure blade began to shine with soft light in his hand, ready to disintegrate into a rain of sparks, Sunny raised his hand and threw the broken sword with as much force as he could gather. However, he didn't throw it at the demon. Instead, he threw it at the miraculous tree, as though trying to harm it. Not far away, the demon suddenly froze, even if only for a second. His scarlet eye followed the shining memory as it flew through the air, approaching the trunk of the great tree. Then the broken sword fell apart, turning into a shower of white sparks, which then disappeared without a trace. None of them even touched the obsidian bark. However, the azure blade had already fulfilled its purpose. It distracted the giant for a few precious moments. For Changing Star, that was more than enough. Chapter 72. Demon Slayers. As soon as the carapace demon froze, distracted by the feigned threat to the great tree, Nephi's lunged forward. There was no hesitation, no doubt, not even the slightest pause between the moment her enemy had lowered his defenses and her reckless attack. Just like Sunny had been utterly focused on observing the monster's movements before, she had been watching and waiting for this exact moment since the beginning of the battle. Changing Star knew that, when the opportunity presents itself, it will only last for a second. Even that single second almost cost Sunny his life. Nephi's wasn't going to waste it. Her graceful figure flew through the air like an arrow released from a powerful bow, almost leaving afterimages behind. The silver blade of her longsword glimmered, reflecting the light of dawn. The black and white armor seemed to turn into a blur. She was going all in, rushing at the enemy without leaving herself even the slightest chance to retreat. But things were happening too fast for Sunny to form a coherent thought. He could only watch, time slowing down to a crawl, a storm of emotions raging in his mind. The demon reacted almost immediately, recognizing the threat, but almost didn't count on a battlefield. A moment of distraction was all it took to lose everything. That one mistake, no matter how small, had been enough to seal his fate. If Nephi's was really capable of breaking through the creature's indestructible carapace, that is. Otherwise, it was all for nothing, and they would be the ones dying instead. The fearsome giant moved his scythe, trying to slice her apart. Pincer flashed from the other side, threatening to crush her body into pulp. But he was a fraction of a second too late. Changing Star was just a tiny bit faster. As she ran, something changed about the cadence of her steps. Sunny couldn't see her face behind the visor of her helmet, but if he could, he would see a grimace of agony contorting Neff's pale face. In the next moment, a soft white radiance ignited beneath the skin of her hands. However, this time, it didn't stay there. Instead, the white flame flowed outward, into the hilt of the silver sword, and then into its blade. The sword suddenly turned into a sharp radiant edge, burning with incandescent white light. It shined so brightly that Sunny felt the desire to close his eyes. However, the radiance wasn't soft and warm anymore. Instead, it seemed to be capable of reducing anything it touched to ash and sharp enough to cut the fabric of the world itself. Perhaps it was even sharp enough to cut the strings of fate. Sunny remembered how Nephi's had described her aspect ability. It can be used for healing. Back then, he had suspected that this phrase of hers implied that there was more to it. He even marveled at how precious and rare such an ability would be. It seemed as though he was right. Changing Star's miraculous flame was capable of both healing and destroying. It possessed an enhancing effect similar to his own shadow control, at least when applied to weapons. Who knew what else it could do? An incredible ability indeed. Looking back, he understood that Nephis had not tortured herself in vain. All the times she pretended to meditate, while enduring the excruciating agony of her flaw in secret, were meant to make this moment possible, to give her enough fortitude to use this ability in battle without passing out from the pain. She succeeded. The question was, would that be enough? Was her sword strong enough to break the mighty carapace of the awakened demon? After all, no matter how incredible the ability, it was still powered by a weak dormant soul core of a lowly sleeper. They were about to find out. A few steps away from the carapace demon's towering torso, Nephis bent her legs and jumped, soaring high into the air. Her sword flashed forward in a vicious thrust, so fast that, for a moment, it looked like a beam of pure white sunlight. Then, it collided with the strange alloy of the giant's lustrous armor right at the spot where his heart was supposed to be. Of course, back when they were hiding in the dead Leviathan's empty spine, Cassie had told them about her vision. In that vision, she saw the carapace demon being attacked by a terrible creature of the deep dark sea. In the aftermath of the battle, the demon was severely wounded and on the verge of dying. The most horrible wound was on his chest, where the armor was torn apart and shattered, revealing the monster's beating heart. With time, all his injuries had healed, except for this one. While the carapace of the demon seemed to have recovered, in truth, it was never fully restored. In this one spot, the armor was secretly weakened, and it was exactly to that spot that Nephis had delivered her blow. It didn't matter whether her radiant sword was really capable of breaking through the impregnable armor of the awakened creature, because she attacked the only weak spot on his body, the place where his armor had already been broken. With a flash of white light, the incandescent sword pierced through the metal of the demon's carapace and plunged into his body, unleashing a fury of fire inside the adamantine shell. It seemed as though the giant was suddenly illuminated from within, with beams of light shining through the cracks in his armor. For a moment, the surreal sight was burned into Sunny's mind. Then, Changing Star's sword had reached the carapace demon's heart and sliced it apart, incinerating everything around it, and making the azure blood of the fearsome creature boil and evaporate. Sunny's legs buckled, and he gracelessly fell on his ass. Wow, we did it? The demon staggered. His arms slowly rose, as though trying to pull Nephis into a final embrace. But then, as his body twitched, they fell to the ground. Neph landed in the sand and jumped back, ready to defend herself. But there was no need. The proud guardian of the Ashen Barrow was dying. The scarlet light in his one remaining eye was dimming, any semblance of intelligence quickly disappearing from his gaze. The demon heavily slumped, all remnants of strength abandoning his mighty body. Turning his head with incredible effort, he cast one last look on the great tree. Then, his gaze stopped on Sunny. There was no fury or madness in that gaze anymore, only some strange, calm, inexplicable emotion. It almost felt like relief. Before Sunny could discern the meaning of that emotion, the last glimmer of light was gone from the eye of the carapace demon. His head rolled back and fell. They won. In front of the giant body, Nephis had dismissed her helmet. Behind it, her face was pale and tired, her hair sticking to it in a sweaty mess. The afterglow of the white radiance was already extinguished, leaving her eyes gray once again. Changing Star kneeled, then lay down on her back, too exhausted to move. The whole fight lasted less than a minute, but it took everything out of both of them. Sunny followed Neph's example, and lay on the ground, trying to catch his breath. They actually won. He couldn't quite believe it. I want to sleep for a week. Remembering that Cassie was still waiting in the branches of the great tree, not knowing who lived and who died, Sunny sighed. A few moments later, he deeply inhaled. Then, straining his vocal cords, he screamed at the top of his lungs. In the silence of the morning, in the center of the tall hill covered with ash and sand, under the branches of a beautiful, giant tree, a strange shout could be heard. One demon's stake, coming right up. Chapter 73, The Circle of Death. A few minutes later, Sunny heard a noise coming from somewhere above. Looking in that direction, he noticed that Cassie was standing at the edge of the wide branch, gripping the golden rope in her hands. Before he could react, the blind girl was already climbing down. She was very cautious, but also quite nimble for someone without sight. He blinked. Is she crazy? That's dangerous. But he was worried for nothing. Cassie quickly reached the ground and let go of the rope, safe and sound. She then summoned her staff and took a hesitant step, trying to remember where his shout had come from. Sunny made his presence known and guided her by saying, I'm here. The blind girl turned her head in his direction and walked forward, carefully feeling the ground in front of her with the staff. Because of how uneven the surface of the island had become, it took her longer than usual to reach him. Just as she was about to walk past, Sunny spoke again. "Hey, Cass." Cassie stopped and lowered her head with a surprised expression. Then she asked, "Why are you lying on the ground?" He smiled weakly. "Ah, it's very comfortable." Suddenly, the blind girl frowned and asked in a worried tone, "Are you hurt?" Sunny shook his head with a sigh. His sense of humor was not always appreciated. In fact, it had often landed him in hot water in the past. "Just bruised all over. Nothing serious. I'm just really tired. That one was really intense." Since Cassie was still frowning, he thought for a moment and added, "Neff is also fine. She's resting a bit further away." Finally, the delicate girl relaxed. Her face cleared, and she offered him a hesitant smile. "You really killed that demon?" Sunny cast a gaze at the giant corpse and closed his eyes. "Yeah, he's very dead." Both of them were silent for some time. Sunny was on the verge of falling asleep when Cassie carefully asked, "So, you're just going to continue lying here?" He opened his eyes and blinked, trying to remember what was going on. "Oh right, it's morning. There are things we have to do." The last day was excruciatingly long and exhausting. They had to make preparations to execute the plan, race to the top of the hill, climb the great tree, hide themselves in its branches, risk their lives to set the demon on fire, not to mention all the stuff that happened after, all culminating in the short but terrifying battle against the creature itself. And yet, it was not time to rest yet. They had to take basic precautions at least. Straining his exhausted body, Sunny stood up and offered Cassie his shoulder. After she placed her hand on it, he walked over to the carapace demon's corpse, stopping at the spot where Nephi's was sprawled in the sand. She greeted them with a tired glance. "Good morning." Out of habit, Changing Star tried to force a polite smile. However, today it did not look very convincing. I give it 3.6 out of 10. Not great, not terrible." Soon, the three of them were sitting in a circle, passing around the glass bottle full of cold, refreshing water. Sunny was in the middle of describing their fight with the carapace demon, so he got distracted for a few moments. That's when Neff attacked. She used her aspect ability to ignite her sword and struck at the weakened patch of armor on the demon's chest, the one you told us about. It really was not as strong as the rest of his carapace, so the sword went through and pierced the bastard's heart. Sunny noted that Cassie did not seem surprised at the mention of Changing Star's new trick. Either she knew all along because Nephi's had told her, or she saw something in one of her visions. Regardless, he decided not to press the topic. The demon was already severely wounded from his fight with the thing from the sea, so it was enough to finish him off. A few seconds later, he was dead. Cassie shook her head in astonishment. "That isn't credible. 2 sleepers killing an awakened demon. I thought that stuff like that only happens in webtoons." Nephi's corrected her. 3 sleepers. "Without your vision and advice, we wouldn't have been able to do anything." The blind girl lowered her face, a little embarrassed. "Still, 2 or 3, it doesn't really change a lot, does it?" Sunny looked from one girl to another, then finally turned to Cassie. "You're right, it's not something one would expect to happen. But anyway, I promised to cook demon meat for you after this is over, didn't I? Are you ready to witness my incredible culinary talent?" He smiled, already tasting the juicy, tender meat in his mouth. However, Cassie suddenly frowned, a hesitant expression appearing on her face. I don't know about that." He raised his eyebrows. "What? Why?" She lingered before answering. "Well, it just seems weird to eat the meat of an intelligent creature, even if it was evil. I didn't think about it before, but now, it just doesn't seem right, I guess." Sunny blinked. Actually, he did not think about it either. In retrospect, the idea of making steaks out of a creature whose intelligence was comparable to theirs did seem a little wrong. Even if that creature was a bloodthirsty demon who would have swallowed them whole without a second thought. It was just how things worked in the dream realm. Monsters devoured humans, and humans devoured monsters. It was the circle of life, death. The circle of death. But the carapace demon was not only smart. He had his own thoughts and personality. Even though nightmare creatures were universally insane and obsessed with murder and destruction, just like he was, there were also other qualities to the ironclad giant. He was proud and fearless, even valiant. When fighting against the terrifying monsters of the Dark Sea, he did not hesitate to stand his ground, refusing to surrender. Cooking the meat of someone like that could indeed be considered strange. How come Teacher Julius did not educate me on the ethics of eating your enemies? What an oversight. Misunderstanding Sunny's silence, Cassie blushed and said, "Sorry. I know it seems ridiculous, but that's just how I feel. You and Neff don't have to do the same." Sunny shook his head. "No, you might be right. I understand. Sort of. It's just that we didn't bring any supplies with us, so we won't be able to eat anything unless we go hunting." The blind girl sighed. Then, her face brightened and she said, "What about the great tree's fruits? I bet they're delicious." Sunny looked at her in amazement. Are you serious? Cassie was visibly confused by his question. Yes? Why? He blinked a couple of times before answering. That tree is magnificent and pretty, but it's also very strange and suspicious. Why is it able to grow here when nothing else can? I'm pretty sure that it's the reason why all the coral around the Ashen Barrow is dead. Have you seen anything else capable of damaging the labyrinth itself? Sunny looked at Cassie, then at Nephi's, trying to show how serious he was about this. In any case, it's too creepy. I don't think that we should eat these fruits. Who knows what they'll do to us? The blind girl smiled. You're being a little paranoid, don't you think? A tree is a tree. Actually, I think it's a wonderful example of how life can prevail against all odds, even in this terrible place. I'm willing to bet that its fruits are perfectly fine. He stared at her, not knowing what to say. How could Cassie be so dismissive of his completely valid concern? That wasn't like her at all. Unpleasantly surprised, Sunny turned to Neph, hoping that she would support him. Changing Star thought things through before speaking. Then, she said in a measured voice, Sunny is right. There are too many strange things about that tree. Eating its fruits would be too risky. Finally, a voice of reason. He exhaled, relieved. However, his heart was still inexplicably gripped with worry. As Cassie sighed with disappointment, Changing Star turned to him and asked, The echo was destroyed? Sunny's face darkened. He was still pained by the loss of his loyal scavenger. Yeah, the demon acted faster than I had expected. He killed it before I could do anything. Nephi's frowned. Too bad. Our speed will be severely reduced. Have you no heart, woman? At least pretend to be sad. My poor echo is gone. His shadow shook its head, amazed at the childishness of its master. Sunny was also surprised by his reaction, considering that his own first thought after the echo had died was about how much money he wouldn't be able to make by selling it. Yeah, it's a pity. Changing Star gave him a nod and then asked, You also lost your sword? Sunny sighed and gritted his teeth. Yes, it shattered when I blocked the demon scythe, which hurt even more than the death of his scavenger. Azure Blade was his first sword. He fought and trained with it for a long time. It was already like a part of him, and now, it was gone. Nephi's raised a hand. Well, you're in luck. I received a memory after killing the carapace demon. It's a weapon. Chapter 74, Midnight Shard. Sunny's heart skipped a bit. Instantly, he forgot all about the Azure Blade. Yes, that sword held a certain sentimental value. But who the hell cares about sentimentality? It came from a carapace scavenger, which wasn't bad at all for his current rank. Few sleepers got to wield awakened weapons. This new memory came from an actual awakened demon. A demon. That made it an awakened memory of the third tier, 2 whole tiers above the Azure Blade. There were 7 tiers in total, corresponding to the 7 classes of nightmare creatures, from beasts to titans. Strictly speaking, a higher tier did not always mean that a memory will be more powerful, but generally, the more advanced a creature was, the more unique and formidable memories it left behind. That's why the Puppeteer's Shroud, which came from an awakened tyrant, and was thus considered to be a Tier 5 awakened armor, was so precious. Please be awesome. Sunny tried very hard to not let his excitement show on his face. Pretending to be nonchalant, he kept his voice even and said, Really? That's good. Nephis took his hand, ruining all Sunny's attempts to appear calm, and closed her eyes. Hiding the startled expression on his face, Sunny felt a spark of energy travel from her body to his. It was just like that time he transferred the Starlight Legion armor to her, only in reverse. You have received a memory, Midnight Shard. Huh, cool name. He summoned the runes and impatiently searched for the description of his new weapon. Memory, Midnight Shard. Memory rank, awakened. Memory type, weapon. Memory description, forged from the shard of a fallen star. This stalwart blade is firm and unyielding. It favors those who are willing to fight to the last drop of blood and knows no surrender. Interesting. Not wasting any time, Sunny summoned the Midnight Shard. Immediately, an elegant sword appeared in his hand. The sword looked a bit like the Azure Blade, but only in the sense that it was single-edged and had a long hilt suitable for 2 hands. However, this was where the similarities ended. For starters, its blade was much longer, somewhere between 70 and 80 centimeters, and slightly curved. It was forged out of the same bright, lustrous metal as the carapace demon's armor. It was incredibly sharp. The hilt was made out of polished black wood, quite similar in appearance to the onyx branches of the great tree. The crossguard was round in shape and more pronounced than that of the Azure Blade, offering better support and protection to the wielder's hand. The sword had no decorations, no ornaments, no embellishments. It was simple and austere, like a true weapon designed for battle and battle alone. It seemed to radiate a cold, fearsome aura. As soon as his hand touched the Midnight Shard, Sunny felt that this sword possessed an unbreakable will. Its blade was strong enough to withstand devastating blows without suffering any damage. With this sword in his hand, nothing would be able to leave Sunny unarmed again. More than that, there was a strange new sensation somewhere deep in his heart. When Sunny held the midnight shard, he could feel a subtle presence, as though there was a deep well of power hiding inside of him, just beyond reach. He couldn't quite understand how to access that power yet, but it was certainly real. I guess I'll have to win its favor first. But how do I do it? I'll have to experiment later. Admiring his new weapon, Sunny looked at Nephi's and said, even I know what type of sword this is. It's a katana, right? She studied the midnight shard, and then answered, technically, it's a take. It's longer than a traditional katana, and has a slightly different blade shape, but they're quite similar. Atake? Well, it sounded nice anyway, and most of the principles he had learned with the azure blade could be applied to a sword of this type as well, since they shared the same foundation. The new acquisition wasn't quite enough to make Sunny forget about the loss of the echo, but his mood did improve significantly. He liked the midnight shard a lot. There was beauty in its simple, resolute design. It was understated and deadly, kind of like Sunny himself. It was a significant upgrade. Suddenly, a dark thought appeared in Sunny's mind. Glancing at Nephi's, he cleared his throat and said after a bit of hesitation, "That's a very nice weapon. Tier 3 no less. Are you sure that you don't want to keep it for yourself?" Changing Star was the one to deal the final blow to the carapace demon after all. By right, the memory belonged to her, but Sunny really hoped that she would refuse. Nephi shook her head. "I already have a sword. It suits me." Inwardly, Sunny sighed with relief. Good, he thought. Makes you wonder, though, if she's unwilling to exchange her longsword for a tier 3 weapon, then what is the tier of that silver sword of hers? He didn't buy the idea that it simply suited Changing Star better even for a second. She had told him herself that the principle of using these types of swords was basically the same. Upgrading to the midnight shard and giving the old weapon to Sunny would not have caused her any problem. The only reason she would refuse it was that it would have been a downgrade instead. Once again, he became curious about the exact circumstances of how Neph had gotten her true name. To receive his own, Sunny had to kill an awakened tyrant. Could it be possible that she had done the same? Or even something more incredible? But he was too tired to try and fish for information. They all were, afraid that the strange winged creature they had seen devouring a dead centurion would appear again, this time to claim the remains of the carapace demon. The 3 sleepers were located to a far side of the island, and hid behind the trunk of the great tree. Only when they were sure that nothing would be able to notice them from above did they finally allow the exhaustion to prevail, and went to sleep. Sunny fell into dreamless darkness almost instantly, happy to finally be able to rest. However, this time something strange happened. He actually saw a dream. Strange, Sunny thought. This isn't supposed to happen in the dream realm, right? Then, there was no more time to think. Chapter 75. Broken Dreams. Sunny woke up from the insistent sense of alarm coming from his shadow. Groggy and disoriented, he opened his eyes and sat up. What's wrong? He looked down at the shadow, and saw it repeatedly pointing up with a tense expression on its, well, it didn't have a face. He could just tell that it was nervous. Trouble? Sunny looked up and saw nothing but the scarlet leaves of the great tree. The sky was hidden, but he could easily tell that the sun was still up. It seemed that he was asleep for just a few hours. There was no threat anywhere in sight. He frowned. What got you so spooked? The shadow just pointed up again, seemingly irritated by his stupidity. Sunny blinked a couple of times and addressed it again. High in the tree. Higher. The sky? Finally satisfied, the shadow crossed its arms. Something dangerous is above the island. That creepy raven thing again? He had to check, but why did he feel as though he was forgetting something? Sunny scowled, trying to understand where this feeling of missing something important had come from. What was there to miss? He was asleep, then woke up and conversed with the shadow. Asleep suddenly, he remembered bits and pieces of a strange dream. At least it seemed like a dream, was it? People weren't supposed to dream in the dream realm. It was just how things worked. From what he knew, only Cassie seemed to be an exception from this rule. He didn't remember much about this supposed dream of his, with even the remaining fragments already fading from his memory. There was a woman grabbing him by the shoulders, an expression of horror and panic on her face. She was saying something, but he couldn't hear what. No, not a woman. It was Cassie. Yes, it was her. And the thing she was saying. Sunny strained his memory, trying to catch the pieces of the dream before they completely disappeared. Yeah, I think she was saying. Suddenly, he could clearly hear Cassie's frightened, tense voice as she was hurriedly telling him to remember something, repeating the same sentence over and over again in a begging tone. You have to remember, Sunny. 5. It's 5. Remember. You have to remember. It's 5. What a strange dream. Sunny cast a glance at Cassie, who was sleeping peacefully near Neff, and shook his head in bewilderment. He wasn't sure if this memory of his was really a dream or some strange scene he had imagined right before falling asleep. With how the dream realm worked, he was leaning toward the latter possibility. Still, I better tell the girls when. He was distracted from this thought by the shadow, which waved its hands impatiently. Oh right, there's a threat in the sky instantly. Sunny had forgotten all about his intention to share the contents of the strange memory of his with Nephi's and Cassie. In fact, he had forgotten that it was strange and possibly important altogether. This lapse in his judgment was sudden and unnatural, but since Sunny couldn't remember things that he had forgotten, he didn't notice anything amiss and went about his business as if nothing had happened. If he did, he could have realized that this might not have been the first time he had forgotten something important since they arrived at the Ashen Barrow. Standing up, Sunny summoned the midnight shard and glanced darkly at the blood-red leaves of the great tree. Feeling the coolness of the black polished hilt in his hand, he felt a little calmer. Woken up by his quiet movements, Nephi's opened her eyes and looked at him, her body tensing up. There was a silent question in her eyes. Sunny shook his head. "I don't know yet. Stay with Cassie while I check things out." Leaving the girls behind, Sunny walked forward. He was planning to reach the edge of the island, where the branches of the colossal tree were not as thick and the sky could be seen through the openings in its crown. Technically, he could have sent a shadow to do this instead of going himself, but in situations like this, where the danger was unknown, Sunny usually preferred to keep the shadow close by in case he needed to use it. Reaching the eastern slope of the Ashen Barrow, he carefully looked up, still hidden in the shadow of the great tree. Up above in the vast gray sky, a small black dot was circling around the island. Sunny's chest became heavy with wariness. Back when the terrible winged beast had first appeared, it looked exactly like this from the distance. Leaving the shadow behind to keep watch on the black dot, he returned and briefly told Nephi's and Cassie about his discovery. "Right now, it's just flying above the island. I don't know if it's the same creature or not, and when it is going to land." Changing Star frowned. Last time, it wasn't very interested in searching for live prey. Perhaps it's mostly a carrion eater, and thus is only interested in the carapace demon's carcass. Cassie offered her own opinion. "Maybe we're too weak and little to satiate it. After all, it never came for the corpses of the scavengers we had slain. As if eating mere beasts is beneath it." Sunny shook his head. Back then, it did come for the carapace centurion's meat, but it took a few scavengers with it as well before leaving. So it'll be too optimistic to think that this abomination will not try to devour us too, if given a chance. Nephi's thought for a while, then gave him a nod. "You're right. The best course of action would be to stay away from the carapace demon for now and hide when it decides to land." Then, looking up, she added, "But first, we must observe it to make sure that it's the same creature and confirm its intentions." Not having an argument against this logic, Sunny led the girls to the spot where he had left a shadow. There, they sat on the ground and watched the black dot as it circled around the Ashen Barrow. Observing the flying creature left them disturbed and unsure of what to do. The black dot drew closer a few times, allowing them to discern that it was indeed the same terrible monstrosity that they had encountered a few weeks before, or at least a creature of the same type. However, it never got too close to the crown of the great tree, as though hesitating to land in its shadow. What's worse, as hours passed by, it was joined by two other abominations of the same breed, each as horrifying and repulsive as the first one was. Now, 3 black dots were circling in the skies above their heads, filling Sunny's heart with dread. One of those creatures, with its corpse-like white body and raven, black feathers, with an unnatural mess of powerful limbs protruding from its wide chest, each ending with a set of terrifying talons, was enough to wipe out their entire group. The memory of how easily the creature had broken through the adamantine shell of the carapace centurion with its massive beak was still fresh in his mind. He suspected that these abominations were at least as powerful as the carapace demon was, or perhaps even more so. And now, there were 3 of them. "We'd better hide well," he thought, cold sweat running down his back. However, the flying monsters seemed to be reluctant to approach the Ashen Barrow for some reason. They just circled around it, sometimes hesitantly approaching, but then gaining height again. Their behavior was strange and disturbing. After some time, Cassie quietly said, "Maybe they're not hungry?" Sunny blinked, trying to imagine a world where a nightmare creature might not be hungry. Was it even possible? He, on the other hand, "I don't know about these albino chickens, but I'm hungry as hell." This was true. The 3 of them had not eaten anything since yesterday. Sunny was afraid that if the abominations did decide to land on the island, the loud growls of his stomach would give away his position. Nephi's glanced at him and asked, "Want to eat some grilled chicken?" Sunny opened his eyes wide and hissed, "Don't even think about it." She stared at him, then turned away with a smile. That was a joke. She knows how to joke. Well, at least someone's sense of humor was worse than his. In the end, their worst fears did not come true. After the sun began to roll toward the horizon, the 3 flying abominations finally made a decision and left the skies above the Ashen Barrow, flying west in a loose wedge formation. They never descended low enough to notice the 3 sleepers, let alone landing on the surface of the large island. Sunny was left drenched in sweat and tired from anticipating a disaster, almost disappointed at the fact that all this worrying had turned out to be for nothing. Looking at Cassie, who couldn't see that the danger had passed, he said, "They're gone." The blind girl exhaled with relief and relaxed, the frown disappearing from her face. Thank heavens. Sitting here and waiting was 5 times worse than hiding from one of them at those cliffs. For some reason, Sunny flinched a little. What did you say? I said that waiting for them to land was very tiresome. He blinked, not understanding why he had reacted so strangely to this innocuous sentence. Did he see a dream having to do with Cassie and number 5? Right, he did. Not that it was anything to think twice about. Oh yeah, you're right. Then he turned to Nephi's and asked, what do you want to do now? Changing Star looked west, where the black dots had disappeared from sight, and said after a short pause, let's check the western edge of the island, and decide on the next high point to reach. Sunny shrugged, not having any objections. Cassie smiled. Good idea. Who knows, maybe we'll finally see the walls of the castle. Soon, they had crossed the island and approached its western slope. Here, the ground was raised just before plunging down, forming a natural rampart that hid the landscape from their eyes. Nephi's was the first to climb up and reach the top. Sunny was just behind her when he felt that something was wrong. Changing Star's posture was somehow strange, stiff and rigid, as though she had suddenly turned to stone. Stepping on the ashen surface of the natural rampart, he worriedly looked at Nephi's and noticed a grim, resentful expression on her face. He had never seen her in such a state before. Turning his head, Sunny looked west and then narrowed his eyes. His face instantly darkened. Feeling the desire to curse, Sunny gritted his teeth and clenched his fists. Inside his head, only one word was repeating over and over again. Damn, damn, damn. Chapter 76, The Abyss. Beyond the western edge of the Ashen Barrow, the landscape of the forgotten shore was not at all like what Sunny had expected and hoped to see. On this side of the island, the slope was much steeper. At the spot where it was supposed to end, the familiar sight of the flat wasteland was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the ground continued to slope downward at a less drastic, but still considerably sharp angle. It continued far into the distance. In fact, the whole island appeared to be standing on the edge of a colossal depression in the earth, one that stretched as far as the eye could see. With its edges slightly curved, it resembled a giant crater left behind by an unimaginable impact. From what Sunny was able to observe, the crater's diameter could only be calculated in hundreds of kilometers. The roots of the giant tree, which could be seen protruding from the soil far below, seemed like tiny blades of grass in comparison to the sheer size of the abyssal chasm's wall. It was like the whole world was tilted on its side, making Sunny's head spin. In short, there were no more high natural features to the west of them. The only way forward was to go down, with no hope of finding shelter from the crushing torrents of the dark sea, which meant that there was no way forward at all. Their journey to the west had come to an end, and with it, all hope of finding a gateway to the real world was lost. Sunny stared at the desolate landscape, feeling rage and disbelief clawing at his heart. He just couldn't believe that all their struggles were for nothing. But the proof was right in front of him, real and undeniable. Damn it all. He tried to think of some cunning way to solve the situation, but there was nothing his imagination could come up with. The dark sea with all its horrors drowned the world every night, and the only way to escape it was to climb high enough before the sunset. With no heights anywhere in sight, what could he do? Sunny glanced at Nephi's, who seemed to be even more crestfallen than him. Her face had turned into an icy mask, a dark look full of bitterness and resentment in her eyes. He opened his mouth, trying to come up with something to say, but no words came to his mind. In the end, they both remained silent, until the distant rumble announced the return of the dark sea. Deep in the colossal crater, dark torrents appeared from beyond the horizon, rushing to fill it to the brim. A little bit stunned, Sunny watched as the water level rapidly rose, finally turning the endless chasm into a vast sea of black. Then, it began to overflow, sending an unstoppable flood of water into the wasteland. Flowing past the Ashen Barrow, it rushed inland, crushing against the coral of the Crimson Labyrinth. Soon, the whole world was covered in seething black water. Sunny licked his dry lips and turned to Nephi's. After a short pause, he said in a raspy voice, I think we found the source of the dark sea. She lingered, watching the last rays of sunshine slowly disappear from the sky, then turned to him with a grim expression on her face. Let's head back. All three of them felt lost and heartbroken because of the terrible discovery. Cassie in particular seemed to be utterly shocked. It doesn't make sense, it just doesn't, she mumbled on their way to camp. How could it be? Gripping Sunny's shoulder, she quickened her step and asked, Are you sure that there's nothing higher than the sea level out there? Are you absolutely sure? He sighed, feeling his mood turning even darker than before. Yes, we looked quite thoroughly. The whole land just goes down, down and down. It stretches to the horizon, as far as we could see, in all directions except for the east. The Ashen Barrow is right on the edge. The blind girl shook her head, but how could it be? I've seen that we had reached the castle. There must be a way. Sunny remained silent, not knowing how to answer. If there really was a way, he had no idea about it. After a few seconds, Nephi's answered instead of him. We will try to come up with something tomorrow. Worst case scenario, we'll have to go around the whole thing. Sunny trembled at the thought. A journey like that would take months. To circle around the colossal crater, they would have to cover many times more distance than they had in the prior weeks, each day bringing the risk of stumbling onto something beyond their ability to resist, and each night bringing the risk of something stumbling onto them. The chances of surviving several months in this hellish place were nothing if not abyssal. Ha ha! Abyssal. With a grimace he tried to not think of the worst case scenario. The darkness of the falling night was not the best environment for scary thoughts. Tomorrow. We'll rest, recharge, and think of something tomorrow. It is just like Cassie said. Since she saw us entering the castle, there must be a way. They reached their temporary camp just before the sun had completely disappeared. Lying on the makeshift bed of fallen leaves, Sunny tiredly closed his eyes and thought, I hope I won't see any dreams today. Then he slightly frowned. Dreams? Since when am I capable of dreaming in this place? Oh right, there was that one dream, or was it a memory? What was it about again? I can't seem to remember. With that thought disappearing from his mind, he fell asleep. In the morning, the mood between the three of them was pretty somber. No one seemed to want to talk or do anything, aimlessly staring at the ground, or the rustling leaves of the great tree. In addition to the blow of yesterday's revelation, they were also hungry. The corpse of the carapace demon was starting to look more and more appealing, at least to Sunny. However, he was still not at the point of breaking his promise to Cassie. Finally, Nephise broke the silence. Standing up, she looked up with grim resolution and said, I'm going to climb to the top of the tree and take a look around. Maybe I'll notice something that we missed from up high. Sunny stared at the giant tree, suddenly feeling incredibly small. It was truly enormous. The ashen barrow itself was already much taller than the giant knight statue and every other shelter they had seen, and the tree almost dwarfed it in size. Climbing all the way up would take a lot of time and effort, but maybe she would really be able to notice something from that incredible height. He scratched the back of his head and said, All right, but be careful. Keep an eye on the sky. If you notice those winged abominations again, come back down. Changing Star gave him a nod and headed for the tree. Without turning her head, she calmly said, as a farewell, Take care of Cassie while I'm gone. It shouldn't be more than a few hours. Sunny waved a hand and watched her walk away. Then, he tried to think of something to do. On a usual day, he would have already started his morning training. Today, he was too hungry. Come on, hunger is not an excuse. Do you think you'll always have a full stomach before a battle? No, so get up and train. Don't you want to try how the midnight shard feels in your hand? With a sigh, Sunny got up. He trained for an hour, enjoying the swift and reliable feeling of his new sword. The long tack was truly incredible. It was light, maneuverable, and unrelenting. Its edge sang as it cut the air. Sunny already felt as though it was a part of him. His movements were fluid and measured, almost elegant. After the training session was over, he decided to do something useful. Walking over to the carapace demon's corpse, Sunny spent some time prying the soul shard out of it. In the end, he gathered all 3 of the crystals with some effort and stashed them into the seaweed rucksack. What to do now? After a bit of pondering, he suddenly got an idea and tried to find the place from his memory. The one where the carapace demon had dropped the transcendent soul shard into the sand. That shard had been brought to the ashen barrow by the subservient centurion, and would be a real treat for Neph or Cassie. He quickly found the right spot. However, no matter how hard Sunny looked, he couldn't find the alluring crystal. In the process, a couple more hours had passed by. Sanj. It was quite large. Where could it be? He was determined to continue the search, but at that moment, the shadow that he had left with Cassie noticed movement in the branches of the great tree. Nephise was back. Sunny walked back to the camp, thinking about what she had found. Was there hope for them after all? Or was there only more bad news? By the time he returned, Neph and Cassie were sitting on the ground with relaxed expressions on their faces. She saw something? Sunny thought, suddenly excited. But in the next second, his eyes widened. The 2 girls were holding something in their hands, their lips painted red. They were eating the fruits of the great tree. Chapter 77. Enthralled. Sunny stumbled and looked at his companions in utter shock. Nephise and Cassie were each holding a large, round, glistening fruit. The skin of these fruits was smooth and black as onyx, while the succulent insides were red as ruby. Their hands, chins, and lips were smeared with red juice, making it look as though they were feasting on blood. The air was filled with an alluring, sweet aroma. Sunny recoiled, but his stomach involuntarily growled, reminding him how hungry he was. Nephise looked at Sunny and offered him a relaxed smile. Hey, he stared at her, lost for words. Finally, after a few seconds had passed, Sunny collected himself and screamed, What do you mean, hey? What the hell are you doing? His voice was loud, full of disbelief and anger. Both Neph and Cassie turned to face him. They were visibly confused. Why are you shouting? Sunny gaped at them, feeling like he had lost his mind. Why were they so nonchalant about this? What was going on here? Trying to find some sense in the situation, he took a cautious step forward and looked at Nephise. Did she? Wait, What was he thinking about? He was so hungry. It was hard to concentrate on anything except for food. Shaking off the unexpected memory lapse, Sunny remembered what he was about to say and pressed. Why did you change your mind? Changing Star frowned. Change my mind? About what? He clenched his teeth, thinking that she was trying to fool him. About the fruits. I thought we had agreed to avoid eating them. Nephise blinked, a confused expression appearing on her face. Did we? Why? Sunny opened his mouth to answer, but then froze. Actually, why did they make that agreement? I can't quite remember. He was sure that there was a reason, but his memory was completely blank. There definitely was an agreement, wasn't there? He was pretty sure that there was, at least up until a few moments ago. Now, however, did he imagine the whole thing? There really was no reason not to eat the alluring fruits, especially when the three of them were so hungry. No, wait, that's not right. Are you all right, Sunny? He flinched and glanced at Nephise, who was looking at him with concern. Suddenly, Sunny felt lost and confused. What were they talking about? Something about some sort of agreement? What agreement? Not knowing how to answer, he just stood there with a frown on his face and pouted. Ugh, this is embarrassing. Did I completely space out while she was talking to me? Fortunately, Cassie quickly came to his rescue. She always knew how to make the situation less awkward. Are you angry because we started eating without you? He looked at her and noticed the big, delicious fruit in her hands. His stomach growled. So hungry, I guess? Cassie smiled and pointed to the ground, where another fruit was placed on the pile of fallen leaves. Her teeth were smeared with red juice. Don't worry. Neff brought 3 of them, 1 for each. How nice of her. Sunny picked up the fruit, looked at it, and took a bite without thinking. Instantly, his mouth was filled with delightful, cool sweetness. The succulent, juicy fruit was probably the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. It was both nourishing and refreshing, with rich texture and soft, lingering aftertaste. The ruby flesh practically melted on his tongue, making his whole body tingle. It was pure joy in the form of a fruit. Wow! Had his delight, Sunny felt disturbed for some reason. Something was very wrong about the whole situation, but what? Taking another bite, he frowned and tried to understand the source of this anxious feeling. It was hard to think about anything except for how heavenly the fruit of the soul tree tasted, but he forced himself to concentrate. Soul tree? Since when? Wait, don't get distracted. Sunny was finally able to pinpoint the source of the strangeness. It was a shadow. When he reached out to pick up the fruit, the shadow did not copy his movements, as though reluctant to touch it. Even now it was motionless, refusing to mimic him eating the fruit. Weird. What is it with this guy? Sunny took one more bite and looked at the shadow, lost in thought. The shadow had an eccentric temper, but it rarely did something without a reason. If it didn't like the fruit, there had to be something wrong with the fruit. Sunny frowned, suddenly feeling a sense of dread grip his heart. There was something wrong with the damn. Why is it so hard to think about this stuff? There was something wrong with the fruit? Why would there wait? Is this why I screamed at Nephise? She broke an agreement. What was the agreement? Sunny was at the precipice of remembering something very important. He felt as though he just needed to pull on the thread, and the whole truth would reveal itself. Something terrible was going to happen if he failed. Then Sunny got distracted. Something unexpected happened, something that required his full attention. Instantly, he somehow forgot all about the problem with the soul tree's fruits, because at that moment, the spell was talking into his ear. Your shadow grows stronger. What? He blinked, then looked at the delicious fruit in his hands. The spell announced the increase in his power right after Sunny swallowed his 3rd bite. Stunned, he raised his head and looked at Nephise. Changing Star, too, was staring at her fruit with a strange expression on her face. Feeling his gaze, she looked up. Sunny licked his lips. Did you? At the same time, Nephise said. I just absorbed a point of soul essence. Without saying anything, they both turned to Cassie. The blind girl was enthusiastically devouring the fruit. Red juice was flowing down her chin and dripping to the ground. Stopping for a moment, she smiled. Actually, I received mine a few bites ago. Sunny's eyes widened. Excitedly, he summoned the runes and found the right cluster. Shadow fragments. 97/1000. He really received a fragment. He received a shadow fragment, without risking his life in a battle against deadly monsters. Finally, Sunny was able to realize why the carapace demon had been so fixated on the soul tree and its fruits. These fruits were pure magic. Forgetting all about the uneasy feeling, he raised his hand and greedily bit into the succulent, delicious, nourishing flesh. Late in the evening, when the sun was already hidden behind the horizon and the dark sea had once again turned the Ashen Barrow into a lonely island, the 3 of them were preparing for the night. They had moved their camp to rest between the roots of the great tree. With newfound energy, received from consuming miraculous fruits, all their worries seemed to fade. With no way to move further west, Nephise, Sunny and Cassie had decided to rest for a few days before making any decisions. They deserved a short vacation. The Ashen Barrows was a perfect place to recuperate. There were no monsters in the surrounding wasteland, It was large enough to protect them from the horrors of the sea, and they had plenty of food thanks to the soul tree. What's more, that food could even provide them with power. Where else would they be able to grow stronger without risking their lives? As far as hell goes, this place was almost a paradise. Sunny lay on the makeshift mattress of fallen leaves, feeling relaxed and optimistic for the first time in many, many days. Things seemed to be getting better. Before falling asleep, he glanced at the mighty branches of the great tree and thought with a bit of regret. With the carapace demon gone, there's no one to protect this magnificent tree anymore. When we continue our journey, it will be completely defenseless. What a shame. His consciousness was already half asleep. However, one last thought entered Sunny's mind right before he completely slipped into the embrace of darkness. What a shame that no one will be here to serve it, and feed it, and help it spread its seeds. Chapter 78. Bliss. In the morning, Sunny was woken up by the gentle rustling of leaves. Opening his eyes, he saw rays of sunshine falling through the scarlet crown of the soul tree, painting the world in soft shades of pink. The sight was beautiful and tranquil. It felt as though none of the dangers and terrors of the dream realm could reach him here. A soft breeze touched his skin, bringing with it coolness and the smell of fallen leaves. For the first time in a long while, Sunny felt at peace. Is this what a vacation feels like? If so, their decision to have one was the best decision ever. He sat up with a yawn and lazily looked around. Cassie and Nephi's were already awake. Seeing them put a smile on Sunny's face. Why the hell am I grinning? Shaking his head, Sunny put on a serious expression and said, "Good morning." The girls greeted him. Then Nephi slightly tilted her head and asked, "Hey, do you remember why we didn't leave anyone to keep watch last night?" Sunny blinked. Indeed, why hadn't anyone guarded the camp? No. I guess we were too tired. Plus it's so safe here. Why deprive ourselves of sleep? She frowned. Sunny expected changing star to berate them, but unexpectedly, she just shrugged. I guess. That's not like her. Am I not the only one in a great mood? To make Neff feel better, he pointed down and said, "Don't worry. My shadow would have warned us if anything had happened." She seemed to have forgotten about her question already, returning to whatever she had been doing before. All three of them were easily distracted these days. Sunny sighed. "So what are you guys going to do today?" Cassie turned to him with a smile and answered in a teasing tone, "Nothing. We're on vacation, remember? So we're just going to rest and relax." Sounds like a plan. Speaking about plans, at that moment Cassie scowled and said with a comically strict expression, "You too, Sunny. You are not allowed to plan, plot and scheme. Just sit back and enjoy the day. All right?" Sunny scratched the back of his head. All right. He felt as though he was forgetting something. But what? Looking at Nephi's, Sunny hesitated and asked, "Remind me, why did you climb the soul tree yesterday?" She glanced at him in confusion. I don't really remember. To get the fruits?" Sunny smiled at the mention of the miraculous fruits and nodded. "Yeah, that makes sense." A few days passed by. Sunny, Nephi's and Cassie spent them idling away, not concerned with anything in the world. Their tired bodies and minds needed time to rest. They slept until noon, ate the delightful fruits, and sat around the fire, talking or simply soaking in the warmth. Sometimes, they would play games or engage in other forms of entertainment. Other times, they would keep to themselves, enjoying the almost forgotten feeling of privacy. Sunny had been a loner for most of his life, so these past few weeks that he had spent side by side with other people, without even a minute to himself, were a taxing experience. He relished the opportunity to be alone with his thoughts once again. Luckily, the island was large enough for the three of them to stay apart if they didn't wish to be disturbed. Not that it happened often. At first, he had expected that lazing around doing nothing would very quickly grow boring, but surprisingly, it did not. He felt perfectly fine simply laying on the ground and staring at the gently swaying branches of the soul tree, caught in a blissful reverie. In moments like these, he would lose track of time, often realizing that entire hours had passed only when the sun was about to set. The concept of time, in general, had become strangely hard to grasp. Sunny wasn't entirely sure how many days they had spent on the peaceful island. He was pretty sure that it was less than a week, but couldn't remember the exact amount. Not being able to remember something had become a common occurrence. All three of them were turning increasingly absent-minded and forgetful. Sometimes, Sunny would catch himself straining to remember details of his previous life or notice the strangeness of their behavior. But a minute later, he would forget about these concerns, distracted by some innocuous thought or occurrence. His memory was becoming hazier and hazier. The only clear things in it were how delicious and refreshing the magical fruits were, how pleasant it was to live under the shade of the soul tree, and how magnificent it was. The tree was beautiful, benevolent and generous. It protected them from the cursed blight of the Crimson Labyrinth, kept the monsters away, and provided nourishment both for their bodies and for their soul cores. Sunny was becoming increasingly convinced that finding the majestic soul tree was a true blessing. The thought of leaving its gifts behind and returning to the horror of the outside world seemed less and less attractive. Why leave when they were perfectly happy here? Well, at least two of them were. While Nephi's was as carefree and tranquil as Sunny and Cassie in the beginning, as time went by, she grew strangely despondent and gloomy. It seemed as though she had reverted back to her old, distant, and unsociable self. Instead of chatting or relaxing with them, Changing Star ended up spending most of her time sitting on the western edge of the island alone, staring into the distance with bleak eyes. Sunny had no idea what was wrong. He was worried about her. Not even the frequent, insistent lapses of memory managed to overcome his concern about Neff. On one of the evenings, Sunny approached the western slope of the island, feeling as though his head was about to split from pain. For some reason, he kept forgetting the reason for this visit on the way here. It took all of his willpower to hold on to his intentions. He wanted to check on Nephi's. Just like always, she was sitting at the ridge of the western edge, gazing into the distance. Sunny climbed onto the ridge and sat down, looking at her with hesitation. "Hey Neff." Changing Star glanced at him. Her indifferent expression was back, making any attempt to understand her true emotions futile. However, it was clear that she was not all right. "Hey." Sunny scratched the back of his head. Was he seeing things, or was her hair a bit longer than before? "Why aren't you enjoying the vacation?" Changing Star frowned. "After a while," she said. "Don't we need to keep moving west?" He raised his eyebrows, surprised. "West? What is in the west?" Neff's frown deepened, turning into a scowl. I don't remember, but I feel. She grew silent, then said quietly, "I feel like I have to do something very important. Abandon the soul tree. What a strange idea." Sunny pondered for some time, trying to understand where she got the idea that they had to move somewhere. Finally he asked, "Why west of all directions?" Nephi's turned to him. There was a strange, pained expression on her face. Gritting her teeth, she whispered, "I don't know." Sunny sighed. If she didn't know, then he, of course, had no idea either. All he knew was that he wanted to make her feel better. But how? Sunny frowned, trying to think of a way. He felt that there was something very obvious that he was forgetting. Something that would instantly erase Neff's suffering. When the realization hit him, he froze. Of course. How could I forget? The answer was so clear. He just had to climb the soul tree and find an especially juicy fruit for her to eat. Chapter 79. Twist of Fate. It was already dark when Sunny returned to the great tree. Cassie was asleep, snuggled comfortably under her cloak. There was a peaceful smile on her face. Sweet dreams. She wasn't bothered by her terrible visions in a long time. Everything became better since they decided to stay on the tranquil island. Everything except for Neff's mood. She didn't even bother to return to camp today, staying at the western edge of the barrow. Sunny didn't like that she was so close to the black water. He sighed. I need to get some tasty fruits for her as soon as possible. She definitely would not be able to stay sad after eating the magical fruits. They were so sweet and delicious. Sunny began salivating just from thinking about them. Maybe I'll find one for myself too. In the beginning, they took turns climbing to the lower branches of the soul tree to gather fruits. Lately though, Nephi seemed to be distracted by her strange melancholy. As the result, the group relied on him to bring down fruits for everyone. He had already picked the lowest branches clean, choosing the ripest fruits first. Later ones were smaller, and not as heavenly, although they still tasted amazing. Since each fruit was big enough to satiate a person for a long time, they rarely ate more than one in a day. The ripest fruits provided Sunny with 1 or 2 shadow fragments, while the smaller ones gave 1 or even none at all. I wonder how many shadow fragments I accumulated. Should be more than 100, right? Maybe even 110. No way. We've been here just for a few days, a week at most. He could just summon the runes and check, but somehow that thought didn't even occur to him. If it did, he would have been horrified. Forgetting all about the shadow fragments, Sunny looked up and scratched the back of his head. Initially, he was planning to climb the tree in the morning and explore higher than he had previously gone, looking for the best, most delicious fruit possible to give to Neff. But after thinking about it, he decided to not wait until the night was over. He could see perfectly in the dark after all. And this way, he would be able to give Changing Star a delightful present much sooner. Stepping close to the trunk of the miraculous tree, Sunny began climbing. The first stretch was the most difficult since he had nothing to grab except for small cracks and bumps on the smooth, obsidian bark. Reaching the branches required a lot of effort. However, he was already accustomed to it. Moving his hands and feet almost on instinct, Sunny got higher and higher. Soon, he was already pulling himself on top of an enormous, wide branch. These first branches were as wide as roads. He sat down and rested for some time, enjoying the coolness of the night air. Sunny had never climbed the soul tree in the dark before. Without the bright sunbeams falling through the leaves, it looked strangely different. The vibrant magnificence was gone, replaced with eerie stillness. The rustling of scarlet leaves did not seem calming and tranquil anymore. In fact, it made Sunny shudder. It sounded like thousands and thousands of trapped souls, all screaming in agony. What's up with me today? How can I even think of such things? What a fool. Good thing that the great tree can't hear me, Otherwise, I'd be so ashamed. Please forgive me, Soul Tree. Shaking his head, Sunny stood up and continued climbing. He was very disappointed in himself. After all the good things that the tree had given them, he had stupidly doubted its benevolence, its greatness, its desire to devour, always ravenous, always growing, starving, hungry, forever. How ungrateful. Why did he even begin to think about? Oh, what exactly was he thinking about? Sunny frowned, failing to recall his train of thought. Ugh, whatever. I'm here to find a tasty fruit for Neff, not practice my reasoning. Climbing higher and higher, he soon abandoned the area that they had explored before. The crown of the great tree was vast enough to form a maze of its own. The large branches grew chaotically in all directions, twisting and crossing each other, with thick foliage blocking lines of sight, and making any attempt of looking for the fruits difficult and time-consuming. Still, Sunny was determined to continue. He figured that if he went really high, where sunlight was denser, the fruits would be much riper. They had never tried a fruit from the higher branches. If he could find a really amazing one, Nephise would have to change her mind and abandon her strange thoughts of leaving the island. After all, these fruits were magical. Maybe she'll even smile. Encouraged, Sunny continued climbing. Time slowly passed. After a long while, Sunny finally decided that he had climbed high enough. He wasn't sure how many hours ago he had started the ascent, but judging by the soreness of his muscles and the visibly diminished width of the branches, he was somewhere in the upper part of the tree. Stepping on one of the branches, he slowly walked forward and looked from side to side. Searching for the fruits was not easy. It required good perception and patience, and a great sense of equilibrium, of course. Falling from this height would not be a great experience. In fact, it would be his last. Carefully observing the surroundings, Sunny moved further and further away from the trunk of the great tree. The branches were softly swaying under his feet. A few times he jumped from one to another, causing a change in the melody of rustling leaves. On the way, he noticed several hanging fruits. They looked ripe and delicious, but none of them was really special, and he wanted to find the most wonderful fruit possible. Finally, Sunny got so far that the branches grew really narrow and thin. Now, they were almost the same size as those of a normal tree, barely able to support his weight, but he still did not find a suitable gift for Nephise. Sunny helplessly looked around, crestfallen. He really thought that he would be able to. Then, he noticed something strange. Some distance away from him, the branches just above the one he was standing on were twisted downward, as though weighed down by something. However, he couldn't quite see what it was behind the almost impenetrable wall of leaves. In fact, he only noticed the anomaly because it was dark. In the light of day, the bright color of the Soul Tree's foliage would make the shape of the branches indiscernible. But in Sunny's night vision, all colors were muted, almost turning into various shades of gray. Interesting. Jumping, he grabbed onto a higher branch and pulled himself up. Then, careful not to fall, Sunny approached the leaf barrier and forced his way through. In the process, he had to enhance his strength and agility with the help of the shadow. Otherwise, he would either have had to turn back or tumble down to his death. Finally, he freed himself from the last layer of leaves and took a step forward. Then, Sunny froze, his eyes opening wide with wonder. Right in front of him, hidden from the world in the secretive pocket of twisted branches, a giant, elaborate bird nest rested between the scarlet leaves. Chapter 80. Spirit of Exploration. The nest was spherical in shape, with a round hole at the center of it. Usually, such a nest would be made out of grass and twigs, but this one was constructed from the branches of the great tree, each at least as thick as a man's arm. These branches were twisted and interwoven together in a chaotic pattern, creating gapless, onyx black walls. Sunny had never seen anything like it. Birds were a rare sight in the real world, let alone giant ones. The size of the entrance into the nest was large enough for a small truck to pass through. The nest itself was several times bigger. Wow! For a second, he felt a sense of fear, afraid that the giant bird was somewhere near. But then his fears disappeared. The nest looked abandoned. It was ancient and empty, some of its parts already on the verge of collapse. It was as though thousands of years had passed since anyone had been in this hidden, secretive place. The air was filled with the feeling of lonesomeness and desolation. Makes sense. If I barely managed to pass through the leaves, how would a giant monster do it without leaving a giant hole in the barrier? Sunny hesitated, caution and curiosity wrestling against each other inside his heart. On one hand, exploring ancient nests was not the best of ideas anywhere, let alone inside the dream realm. It posed great risks. On the other hand, it also could lead to a great reward. Plus, wasn't it just too damn interesting? In the end, Sunny decided to climb inside the nest to satiate his curiosity. He had convinced himself that it was safe following an unexpected train of thought. In his warped state of mind, Sunny was convinced that the Soul Tree was a great and benevolent being, one that protected them from the terrible threats hiding in the outside world. So, how could anything having to do with the great tree be unsafe? Moving closer to the entrance of the nest, he balanced on the edge of the branch and tried to look inside. However, he wasn't tall enough to see anything except for the inner side of the nest's roof. Since his position was pretty precarious, Sunny decided not to delay the inevitable and jumped, throwing himself up and over the lip of the entrance. A moment later, he landed on a soft surface. The lower part of the nest was covered in a thick cushion of white, silky spiderwebs. Time had made them brittle and pliable like sand. There was so much spiderweb around that for a moment, Sunny thought that he had fallen into a giant white cocoon. But no, it was just a nest, and there, in the center of it, was as Sunny blinked. At the center of the nest, there was an egg. A giant, ancient egg that was as tall as he was, gray and seemingly lifeless, as though turned to stone by the passage of time. Forgetting to breathe, Sunny looked around, making sure that there was nothing, and no one, else around. But no, the giant nest was empty and silent, with not even a stray shadow hiding anywhere in sight. Wow, fascinating. Sunny felt strangely excited. The feeling of discovering something incredible, something that no one except for him had ever seen, filled him with a deep sense of wonder and satisfaction. He had never known that there was such a side to him, one full of an explorer's passion. Let's check this thing out. Walking on the soft silk, Sunny slowly circled the massive egg and studied it. At a first glance, it seemed to be made of stone. The surface of the egg was colored in various shades of gray, which were overlaid over each other like moving clouds. This pattern was strangely beautiful, giving the egg a mysterious aura. But overall, it was just big and smooth. Sunny scratched the back of his head, then stepped closer and put his hand on the surface of the egg. Immediately, he felt a strong sense of astonishment. The egg was warm to the touch. Is it still alive? In the next second, Sunny felt a strange pull affecting his core. It was as though the egg was trying to steal his life force. He jerked his hand away, and looked at the egg with dark apprehension. The damn thing was not only alive, but also capable of sucking the life out of anything that touched it. It only failed to eat his soul because of one reason. As far as Sunny knew, he was the only existence in two worlds without an actual soul core. He had the mysterious shadow core instead. That's why his life force had not been affected. Phew, that was close. Looking at the giant egg, Sunny thought about how to get back at it. The nest, without a doubt, once belonged to an extremely powerful nightmare creature. Therefore, its spawn was also a being of considerable strength. However, due to some unknown reason, that being had not been able to hatch, and was left behind by its parent, destined to remain trapped within the egg for all eternity. Or at least until some unfortunate fool came close enough to feed it with soul essence and give it enough power to break free. Luckily, I'm not a fool. Wait, though, maybe I am. His decisions have been very strange lately. He couldn't quite explain some of them, including this latest one. It was as though his thinking ability had been reduced, whatever. I'm still smarter than a damn egg. Like a true explorer, he went where no one had gone before and made an incredible discovery. He found an unbelievably mysterious, rare being, one that not a single human had ever heard of. Naturally, he had to kill it. That's what the spirit of exploration was all about, wasn't it? Summoning the midnight shard, Sunny thrust it into the stone surface of the egg, causing a rain of sparks to fall on the spiderwebs. The sharp blade slid harmlessly across the stone, leaving only a shallow scratch on it. Tough bastard. The egg was sturdy enough to withstand a strike from an awakened weapon. If it was that resilient, Sunny was scared to imagine how powerful the adult monster would be. It was definitely not an average nightmare creature. But then, he was not an average sleeper. His shadow flowed from his hands onto the midnight shard, turning the polished metal of the blade black and lusterless. Immediately, a cold aura radiated from the sword, making it feel sharp enough to cut the world apart. Stepping forward, Sunny raised the shard above his head and sliced down, delivering a crushing blow. Enhanced by the shadow, the dark blade bit into the stone surface of the egg and split it apart. Cracks ran through the giant stone egg as Sunny's sword plunged into it. A flash of sinister crimson light shined through the cracks, then disappeared, leaving behind nothing but darkness. A torrent of viscous, black liquid flowed onto the white spiderwebs. In the ensuing silence, Sunny heard the spell's bewitching voice. You have slain a great devil, vile thieving bird spawn. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory.